Assistant Professor in Arabic and Islamic Studies here at Georgetown University. I'd like to welcome you to our new series where you get to meet scholars and hear them discuss their intellectual journeys. My guest today is Dr. Niloofar Haeri, professor at Johns Hopkins University. You can find her full biography on this page. Dr. Haeri, welcome and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for the invitation. So would you like me to start?
Yeah, so please, if you can maybe begin with telling us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to your areas of research. I think it would be really nice for us to just to get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. As I understand it, you would prefer that I talk more about also the non-academic, the context within which one makes these choices.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great.
So, yeah, so thank you. And, the questions that you sent are interesting because they sent me back to things I haven't thought about in quite some time. But basically, from where I started to where I have ended up, it's a winding road. There's nothing quite obvious about it, I began high school in Tehran, which is where I was born. I was sent to Boston, where I had two older sisters to finish high school. And toward the end of my high school, I heard the term linguistics. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. I want to do something that has to do with languages, because I was getting very encouraged about learning languages, And so I began to tell people that I want to do linguistics, but I had absolutely no idea what it was. And I was hoping no one would ask me, what do you mean linguistics? But in any case, in both as an undergraduate, in undergraduate years and my graduate school, I did major in linguistics. I thought that if I major in linguistics as an undergraduate, if I don't like it, then I have a chance to change in graduate school. But I did end up liking it. However, what happened is that I was very attracted to Chomsky and very formalist linguistics. And after about 2 years of doing that, I began to realize that, I actually don't want to spend my time doing this very formalist kind of almost mathematical in tone, that kind of linguistics. And I was very lucky because in our department, we had William Labov, one of the main founders of sociolinguistics in the US, and we also had Gillian Sankoff. So I kind of veered toward sociolinguistics. And one of the things that really excited me was that it required fieldwork. It required you to get out and go learn from strangers, talk to strangers, and find out what you can learn from them. That was very exciting. And, they had a year-long course where we had to we were divided into groups and we went to neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and that really increased my love for doing sociolinguistics. So that was my first change from formal linguistics to sociolinguistics. But then what happened is that when it came time to decide what I would write my dissertation about, everyone assumed I would write it in Persian, which is my native language. And it was very interesting because there were two kinds of reactions. One, those people who didn't know the difference very much between Arabic and Persian. And so they would think, oh, well, they're not a very big difference. She'll do Arabic, she'll do Persian. And then there were others, of course, who knew that, I would have to learn from scratch if I wanted to do Arabic. And, they warned me that my degree would take longer. But, somehow I had started to fantasize about Arabic and learning Arabic. And when I read work in Arabic, on Arabic, I found it more interesting and exciting than the work I read on Persian. And so I thought, okay, I'm just going to take this chance. Even if it takes longer, it doesn't matter. I want to learn Arabic. So luckily, I got a Title VI grant, summer grant, and I used it to go to Middlebury College. That was really nice because otherwise I would have had to probably find a summer job and not learn anything. But, the summer school was great. And I wrote a proposal to do field work in Egypt on gender and language, which was a very big topic at the time. Is it women who lead language change or is it men? And again, I was lucky because this fieldwork got funded. I mean, I think when I was thinking about your questions, I was thinking, well, I mean, the choices haven't simply depended on my wishes. My wishes have to get some funding. Otherwise, in the absence of personal wealth, you, you really need to. And so, just going to quit out of mail. I'm so sorry. Yeah. And so, got funded by the Winogrand Foundation and the Institute for Intercultural Studies. And so I went to Egypt and I had private lessons, and I also, on top of that, had to learn classical Arabic. But it was all very exciting, you see. But again, a change came for me because while I was doing this research and really, enjoying it and finding Egypt an amazing place, I began to realize that the intellectual tradition I was working in, which is qualitative and quantitative sociolinguistics, was a bit too narrow for certain kinds of questions. And so I, did finish my fieldwork in that framework. I, published a book out of that dissertation, but I then, I was really gravitating much more toward anthropology and linguistic anthropology. And the reason was that I felt like the questions I became interested in while doing fieldwork in Egypt would not I would not be able to really reply to them within this framework of sociolinguistics. The good thing about anthropology is that you're guided by your question. You're not guided by disciplinary boundaries, whereas linguistics has very sharp disciplinary boundaries. If you ask certain questions, you are told that falls outside of linguistics, whereas in anthropology that never happens, right? Everything you are able to pursue the kinds of questions you want. So for my second fieldwork in Egypt, I completely came out of that intellectual tradition of sociolinguistics, completely. And I have to say that, leaving an intellectual tradition in which you have been trained has its costs, because you have established yourself within a certain framework. People get to know you. You're trained in it, and then you leave it, right? So, I mean, leaving it doesn't mean that you haven't benefited from the ways in which, questions have been responded to, but it's different because you then enter. And so, if one is willing to pay the cost of leaving a tradition in which one has established oneself, and then forever after, you see what happens is you end up on the margin of the field you have chosen to enter because you didn't get your training in it. And many people might continue not to recognize you because you weren't trained, because you're not one of them, because you're on the margins. But the intellectual payoff is great. I mean, maybe I'm lucky, but I felt like the fact that you're on the margin of something makes you look at things in a way that is fresh, that's without the biases that you have inherited from those frameworks. And so that's how I ended up doing my second fieldwork in Egypt on these questions that really required, a multidisciplinary approach. And do you want me to go on to my recent book? Or?
Oh, this is fascinating. Please continue. Yeah.
So, by then I had ended up working on Egypt for quite some time and had learned a great deal. I after publishing my second book on Egypt, um, which was really on how language uh, sheds light on culture, politics, and religion, all the dilemmas that people face with regard to language. But at that point, what in my life, what happened is that my life was getting rather fragmented because I was spending summers with my aging parents, who I absolutely wanted to see in Tehran every summer. My husband was in London, and I was teaching in the US. And then when I had a child, I was basically a single mom for quite some, quite a few years. And so I started to think, well, why don't I now go and do something in Iran? Because at least, it would be a less fragmented kind of existence. Um, and I have to say, I was kind of lost for a while because, again, not only had I walked out of a tradition, I now also walked out of Arabic into a situation that, well, a context in which I had grown up, but I hadn't done scholarly work on it. And so I thought, okay, well, let me just see if I can work in Iran. And I then began a project there. And in the middle of that project, I ended up in these conversations with several women uh, on salat, on doing the salat in Persian namaz. And I found those conversations so interesting that I thought, okay, well, here's a project I can do in Iran, especially because what they were saying was reflecting the larger debates in Iran after the revolution with regard to uh, who is a true Muslim, what is true Islam. And so that's what my last book is about, which just came out.
No, congratulations. I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
So I guess at this point, I'm curious, maybe you can address the question of, the types of, I mean, you've taken us through your different projects, and I'm wondering, and you've also taken us through the different fields that you've tried to work within and without, I guess. And so I'm wondering in what ways the types of questions you've asked have changed, and also in what ways have you altered your methods and approaches to answering those questions, given the fact that you're working within different fields, and also that you've had a really long and productive and fruitful career. And so, we're now at a time when things have sort of evolved and changed as well. So as the fields have changed, how have your questions changed, and how have your approaches to addressing those questions have changed?
My it's easier to answer in what ways my approach and my methods have changed. Of course, I recognize your question, and I'll go back to it. But I began with a very well-defined method, which actually is something to recommend sociolinguistics for. It's very well articulated. So, for example, you have a certain number of, it works according to sociological grids. Say you interview 10 lower middle class, young men with this kind of education, and then the same with women, and then this. It's very well defined, and basically, generally you don't spend all that much time with them. You interview them, you ask certain questions, you might go back and interview them again. But it's different from anthropological fieldwork, where you spend a lot of time with the people you care about. I mean, for example, in my last research, it took place between 2008 and 2016. And I spent really a very long time with the women that I write about. Um, so that's one thing. But the other thing is that, so you spend more time, but also you are more open to discovering things that you haven't even thought about before, right? You have this openness. You let the field happen to you. You let yourself to discover what it is that things. And part of that has to do with the method, with the fact that you just spend a lot of time with people. You hang out, you know, as Clifford Geertz used to say, you do a lot of hanging out. You just hang out without necessarily having a very particular focus or agenda or set of questions, and things develop from there, right? Uh, so that's how my methods have changed, that it's more open to discovery, spending far more time. um, and I think the way in which my questions have changed is, it primarily has to do with how broadly I want to look at things. How broadly do I want to address something? Do I just sort of walk back a little bit and, you know, limit the context, or do I look at a much broader context, historically, sociologically, culturally, and so on? I think that's how my questions have changed.
Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and it was such a pleasure hearing you discuss your work and hearing a little bit more about your personal life as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Okay, see you soon. Bye bye.